Prophecies foretell World War III is on the horizon. After that, the world will yield their sovereignty to a fully functioning world governing body led by the Antichrist. Are we watching this scenario unfold right now? We will discuss these ominous prophecies on today's edition of End of the Age. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. Thank you for joining me for Thursday's edition of End of the Age. Now, probably the most two ominous prophecies, other than the mark of the beast, in the end time, they're among the most ominous, I should say, would be the Sixth Trumpet War, World War III. I mean, none of us on earth have lived through anything like this. It's hard for us to almost imagine that something like this would take place in our lifetime, but the Bible prophesies that it will. And then, of course, following that, world government. So let's talk about the scenario of World War III, and then I'll talk about how it ties into world government here in just a moment, and then we'll go through some current events. What's happening right now as I tie these scenarios together? So the Sixth Trumpet War, World War III, it's mentioned in Revelation chapter 9, verse 13 through 16. You've heard about us talk about it many times. And I'm going to read from the New Living Translation, and it says this: Then the sixth angel blew his trumpet, and I heard a voice speaking from the four horns of the golden altar that stands in the presence of God. And the voice said to the sixth angel, which had the trumpet, Release the four angels who are bound in the great river Euphrates. Then the four angels who had been prepared for this hour and day and month and year were turned loose to kill 1/3 of all the people on the earth. And I heard the size of their army, which was 200 million mounted troops. So from this prophecy, we know three things. Number one, the origin of the war. Where will the war emanate from? From the Euphrates River region, housed in Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And then we also know that, and I'm sad to say this, I don't want this to just roll off my tongue, but 1/3 of the world's population is going to be destroyed. It's a horrible prophecy in my mind. I mean, 1/3 of the world's population, thinking about that. And then also we know that an army of 200 million soldiers will participate in this war. And so we know that either China, either India, or the Muslim population of the world, those three entities could actually field an army of 200 million soldiers. And so one of those three, or maybe more of than one of them, will be involved in this war. So that's World War III in Bible prophecy, Revelation 9, verse 13 through 21. Then on the heels of World War III is a prophecy of a world government. So, I'm going to bring up a picture here. If you're following us on the internet, you can see that I'm teaching from our screen today in the studio. And this is a picture of a world governing beast that John saw. In Daniel chapter 7, he saw four separate beasts: a lion with eagle's wings, a bear, a four-headed leopard, and a 10-horned beast. They were separate individual beasts back in Daniel 7. 650 years later, John wrote the book of Revelation, and he gave a depiction of these beasts, and they were a combo beast. They were molded into one big beast. The prophecies found in Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 through 8. And John said, Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were as the feet of the bear, his mouth the mouth of the lion. And the dragon, or Satan, gave him his power, his throne, and his great authority. And I saw one of the heads as it was mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. We know now that was the Berlin Wall. The nation was Germany. The one head was Germany. And the healing of the deadly wound was the Berlin Wall when it was torn down. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon, who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue 42 months, the time of the Great Tribulation, just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ in the Battle of Armageddon. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints. Remember, I said this is during the final 3.5 years, which is the tribulation period. And so I know we're coming up to a break. If you're following me today, if you're listening on the radio, I'm teaching from the screen for the first half hour. And perhaps you could go watch our archived show at endtime.com to see the graphics that I'm going to pull up today and follow along with our program.
In 2018, we've seen Bible prophecy fulfilled like never before. From the halls of the United Nations to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, Endtime Ministries has continued to reveal Bible prophecy in the news headlines around the world every day. Whether it's through our broadcast, online Jerusalem Prophecy College, your gifts enable us to put vital, timely materials in the hands of those who need it most. Because of you, we have continued to replace fear with faith in the hearts of Christians around the world. As we move into 2019, we will see prophecies coming to pass at an even swifter pace. We will continue to see the preparation for a one-world government system and even more media censorship for Christians and outside thought. Because of this, we need your support. Your donation of any amount enables us to continue to broadcast, produce materials, and be a voice in the ever-growing censored media. To become a partner or to give a one-time gift, visit endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME right now. That's 1-800-363-8463. Your call says you care about the message of the end time and the gospel to reach others. Please call or go online now to give your best end of the year gift. It will truly make a difference. Thank you for your support. Please call or go online right away.
I have left a piece of my heart in Israel and her people. We would like to thank Endtime for doing such an awesome job with our Israel tour. We had the privilege to rub shoulders with Pastor Baxter. He is wonderful. Helene from Australia. Join Irvin and Judy Baxter May 2nd through 17th, 2019 for the Ultimate Israel Tour experience with a Greek island cruise. Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 to sign up today.
So I'm describing this world government beast that John prophesied about in Revelation 13. And John says, it was given unto this beast and the Antichrist, it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. Now I'm going to show you a timeline in just a moment and describe some of these things to you. And the Bible says, and authority was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. So we know he's going to preside over a world governing body. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. So I want to bring up, that's a prophecy of the world government. And I want to bring up a timeline now for us to follow, because I want to go through a World War III world government scenario with you. And it's very important to my topic today. So if you can see here, and like I said, if you're listening on the radio, you can go to Endtime and look at this, and it's archived. You can watch it anytime, watch it tonight, whatever. But I'm going to walk you through a timeline here real quick to help you grasp the situation I'm talking about, because we're going to live through this. So it's very important that you understand it. And you understand, we've talked many times about the final 7 years and the peace agreement that starts this final 7-year period. The peace agreement starts the final 7 years. The temple's going to be rebuilt. Animal sacrifices will be resumed. Then the war in heaven occurs, the abomination of desolation. Now, I'm going to walk through this quickly because I want to get to my World War III world government scenario. That's halfway through the final 7 years. Then the Antichrist takes control at this midway point, takes control, fully control of the world government. And we move off into the final 3.5 years. The final 3.5 years is the Great Tribulation. That's when the mark of the beast is doled out. And then at the end of this final 7-year period is the rapture, the second coming of Jesus Christ, the Battle of Armageddon. A lot of different things happen at that point. Now, the scenario I want to talk to you about today is this world war, World War III, the Sixth Trumpet War, and the world government. So, we don't know for sure. I can't prove scripturally whether the war happens before or after the peace agreement. I can prove scripturally that the war has to happen prior to the midway point, the abomination of desolation. I can prove that scripturally. I'm not going to take time to do it today because I got a lot of information to go through. But I know that the war will happen on this side of the final 3.5 years. Happens prior to that. It's always been our opinion, looking at the geopolitical situation in the world, the conflicts, and what's really going on in the Middle East, because that's where this war emanates from. It's always been our opinion that the Sixth Trumpet War would happen here prior to the peace agreement, and then we would move off into a fully functioning world governing body that the Antichrist would assume control over halfway through this final 7-year period. And so, understanding that part of the prophecy, the Sixth Trumpet War could happen at any time. The Sixth Trumpet War is the sixth trumpet of the 7 trumpets in the book of Revelation. The first 5 events have already occurred. The Sixth Trumpet War is staring us in the face. The Sixth Trumpet War and this peace agreement are the next 2 prophecies to be fulfilled on God's prophetic timeline. So why am I talking about them today? Well, if you understand what's going on in the world right now, a world governing body, it has already been established, and it's been established for decades now. And it's coming into power. We watch, Irvin Baxter, myself, our research team, we're constantly following the ongoing fulfillment of this prophecy of this world governing body. There are many institutions that are set up specifically designed to govern the world. The United Nations is the seat of that, but you've got the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, International Criminal Court. I mean, there's many of them. So at the end of the day, in looking at this scenario, the world government's already established. On this timeline here, we know that the Antichrist, again, doesn't take power over that world government until this halfway point. That's when he's revealed. That's when we know who the Antichrist is, and that's when we know who the false prophet is, which will be the Pope at that time. But prior to that, this world governing body is just gaining teeth. Right now, it's kind of like a paper tiger, but they're gaining teeth. There are efforts to do away with the UN Security Council veto power, a lot of different things that are efforts to give them more teeth or enforcement method. Right now, like I say, any one of the Security Council members can veto a UN resolution and nothing happens. So it's kind of like a paper tiger, but they're gaining teeth slowly but surely. And so the scenario we're talking about here is on the backside of this Sixth Trumpet War. There's going to be a huge effort towards world government and all the nations of the world yielding up their sovereignty to this world governing body. And the scenario I want to go over really quick is that, and I've talked about this before on the radio, but in the grand scheme of things and some of the information I'm going to go over with you today, it's very, very important. If you understand the original efforts towards a world government over the last, let's say, just over a century, you had globalists that want to form a world governing body. It's their life's goal is to have a world government and to rule the world. Do away with the nations of the world, do away with borders, and everybody yield up their sovereignty, have a global state that answers to a world governing body. That's the goal. And the Bible tells us that's what's going to be, that's the situation in the world when the Lord returns at His second coming. Well, that effort is already underway and has been for decades now. But in an effort to get people to buy into that, in other words, they realized they couldn't just come on the scene and say, hey, everybody bow, yield up your sovereignty, all you nations around the world, yield up your sovereignty to us, and we're going to dictate you from now on. That's what they want to do, but they realized they'd had war. So at the end of the day, they had to create a crisis big enough to get people to buy into this scenario. So you had originally World War I. Well, on the heels of that, there was an effort towards world government, which was the League of Nations. But the League of Nations failed because the United States Congress would not sign on to it, and without the United States involved, there was no world government. So they said, it just failed. That was after World War I. So they said, well, perhaps the world, that crisis wasn't big enough. So we've got to have a crisis, but in this next crisis, we've got to have the United States involved to the point where they will yield up their sovereignty and be part of this world governing body. Well, what happens next? World War II. And World War II ended in 1945. The United Nations Charter was signed in 1945. So it was the next effort. They said, hey, what's the solution to World War? World government. So in 1945, the United Nations was established, and we started marching off into establishing the United Nations as the world governing body. So in other words, there would be no more world war. Nations, instead of going to war, would go to the United Nations and work out their differences there and just talk them out. Well, how has that worked out? We've had many wars, millions of people killed since then. So it hasn't worked out too well. But they would say it hasn't worked out too well because we can't dictate to people. We want to pass resolutions and carry them things out, but the 5 victor nations of World War II have veto power. They vetoed these resolutions. So we don't have a fully functioning world government like we want to have with the enforcement methods or the teeth that they want. So World War I wasn't big enough of a crisis. World War II wasn't big enough in crisis. And of course, they got the United States involved with Pearl Harbor. The United States gets involved full bore at that point. But they don't have the enforcement methods, the teeth. People haven't been willing to yield up their sovereignty. Now, many nations have, but not all the nations on the earth like they want. So guess what? There's coming another war, and it's going to be a much bigger war. You say, well, how do you know that? I just read you the prophecy of it. Revelation chapter 9, verse 13 through 21 tells us specifically World War III is coming. Why do you call it World War III? Well, World War I, just over 8 million people killed. World War II, about 52 million, just over, between 52 and 53 million people killed in World War II. Well, the Bible prophesies in World War III, the Sixth Trumpet War, 1/3 of the world's population is going to be destroyed. So it's very important that we understand what's coming in the near future. And on the heels of World War I, you had the League of Nations. On the heels of World War II, the United Nations. On the heels of World War III, we're going to move off into a fully functioning world governing body. The Bible's very, very specific about this. So that's why I wanted to bring this scenario to you today, because the Sixth Trumpet War is the next event. The Sixth Trumpet War and the Middle East Peace Treaty are the next events to occur on God's prophetic, this huge prophetic timeline that He's given us throughout Scripture. And so I wanted you to see this timeline today because these are the prophesied events that God has laid out that are just ahead of us now. This sixth trumpet war, we're staring this right in the face. Remember, the globalists want a world government, but nations aren't willing to yield up their sovereignty. And on top of this, the international community sees the efforts towards a world government as deteriorating or disintegrating right before their very eyes. Why? Because there's nationalist movements now, i.e. the United States. From 1945 on, the United States was the main driver towards this world governing body. We're the ones that wrote the charter for the United Nations. Alger Hiss, a convicted communist spy, wrote it while working for the United States. And they still operate from that same charter today. So we were the main driver and have been the leader of that world governing body up until the election of Donald Trump in 2016. Once that happened, Trump comes along and says, no, that's not going to happen. You know, we're not going to comply to all of your edicts. We're pulling out. And he starts just pulling us out of everything. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, Paris Climate Agreement, I mean, you name it. The Global Compact on Migration just starts pulling us out of everything. Well, the international community has been screaming at him ever since. They cannot stand him. They've been howling at the moon ever since he started pulling us out of this world governing body. Why? Because these globalists, their goal has been for decades now to have a world governing body. The United States has been the driver. Now, the principal driver has said, no, we're not going to fund you like we have all these years. We're not going to participate like we have. We believe in America first. That's why it's important when you hear Donald Trump talk about his America first policy, you'll see everybody. Emmanuel Macron of France, when Donald Trump recently gave a speech and said, hey, we're going to push our American first policies, Emmanuel Macron just spoke a few hours after him at the same meeting and rebuked him over that for his nationalistic policies. And he rebuked him in front of the whole world and said, we can't have that. We need collective efforts. We need world government. That because Emmanuel Macron is a socialistic, one world governing driver. And so it's important that we understand this scenario because right now we're staring the sixth trumpet war in the face, and that's going to be the entrance ramp for the Antichrist. On the heels of this sixth trumpet war, imagine 1/3 of the world's population has been killed. On the heels of that war, the world is going to say, the cry for peace is going to be deafening, really. And the nations of the world are going to say, okay, we'll do away with our borders. We will, because that's what they want, a borderless world. Anybody that wants a borderless world right now is a believer in world government. Not nationalism, but globalism. And that's the issue of our time right now. Nationalism or globalism. Belief in the nation state or world government. You can't have it both ways. So it's very important that we understand that prophecy-wise. Because on the heels of this world war that's coming, it's the entrance ramp for the Antichrist because nations will yield up their sovereignty and to this world governing body. That thing's going to ramp up and it's going to be fully functioning at that point. It will be able to pretty much dictate what it wants to do. And then the Antichrist is going to usurp authority over that. And he's eventually, during this first 3.5 years, Israel's going to rebuild her third temple. At the halfway point of this final 7 years, the Antichrist is going to stand in that temple, and he's going to feel comfortable doing that because the United Nations, an international body, is going to supervise a sharing arrangement that's been allowed under the peace agreement. So he's going to feel comfortable going in the temple and saying, hey, I'm God here. Stop these sacrifices. Now, this is all laid out in the Bible. I could give you scriptures for all of it and prove it in great detail. And so he's going to ride the wave of this world, this crisis that's killed 1/3 of the world's population. He's going to ride that to the helm of this world governing body and rule the world with an iron fist, except for, obviously, the Bible tells us the United States, Israel, and Jordan will not come under the reign of the Antichrist. So he's going to ride the wave to usurp authority over this world governing body and pretty much dictate most of the world for that final 3.5 years. That's when the mark of the beast is going to be doled out, and people will be persecuted at that point. And then at the end, the second coming happens, and the Battle of Armageddon and a lot of different things. So I wanted to go through this scenario today because what we're watching happen, this prophetic scenario, is exactly what's playing out in our news today. The abolishment of the nation state. The international community is calling for the abolishment of the nation state and calling for the efforts of globalism to continue. Globalization, everything's global now, international. There's no nation state. Trade should be managed by the world government. And they should be able to dictate to the nations the trade agreements that they make, or their climate, or migration. They want to be able to dictate everything to every citizen on the planet. And anybody that doesn't want to play ball with that, then they try to attack them. And look at what they're doing to Donald Trump right now. He gets rebuked by other world leaders when he shows up at these meetings, and they rebuke him for his nationalistic stance, his stance on America first. And so I wanted to go through this scenario because I know I'm coming up to a break here, and the last 30 minutes of the program is going to be devoted to showing you the scenario that's playing out in our world today. I mean, are we living through this right now? Absolutely. And I'm going to show you that in the last 30 minutes of the program. So if you're listening to us on the radio and you don't hear the last 30 minutes, go to endtime.com and watch the DVD or the video, and I'll show you what's going on in the news.
Move Mountains with Irvin Baxter. This book by Irvin's grandson provides 30 days of devotion that will enhance your relationship with God and others. Authentic illustrations from early morning devotions at Endtime will help you find your purpose and eliminate fears. Commit to taking this 30-day journey and experience real life change. Get your book for only $14.99. Call 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com/move.
If ever people needed to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for Endtime magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will impact your life. Endtime has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that Endtime magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and lead them in doctor's offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine has done in many lives. Call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 and get your subscription today.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archive button.
So, what'd you think about that scenario there? About the end of, after these world wars that we've had, we jump off, and the solution from the international community is world government. Every time. World War I, League of Nations. World War II, United Nations. But they don't have the enforcement methods they want right now, so guess what's coming? World War III. The Bible prophesies it. It's going to happen. Just like all of the other hundreds of prophecies that have occurred prior to that, World War III is coming. We know that. It's prophesied in the Scripture. And also, this world governing body, and the Antichrist. So I want to go to a scenario today going on in the news, and this article actually came back in 2017. It was last year. But I want to read it because we're way off into this. We're not at the beginning of all this stuff, and it's not going to happen, hundreds of years from now. This was last year. Now think about the scenario that I just gave you about the at the end of these world governing policies, and then the deterioration of the mindset of the world and this world order. And they said, hey, we've got to, on the heels of that, this is going to cause war. And there's been a world war. So listen at this scenario. This is from Foreign Policy magazine, a very influential magazine, and the article is titled, Backing into World War III. For us, prophecy people, it would mean the Sixth Trumpet War. So the article states this: think of the two significant trend lines in the world today. One is the increasing ambition and activism of the true great revisionist powers, Russia and China. The other is the declining confidence, capacity, and the will of the democratic world, and especially the United States, to maintain the dominant position. Remember, I said we've been in charge of this world government pretty much up since 1945. Well, they're also talking about this political thing, the situation to maintain the dominant position the United States has held in the international system, or the establishment of this world governing body since 1945. And those two lines move closer as the declining will and capacity of the United States and its allies to maintain the present world order, the world government's what we're talking about here, folks, as they meet the increasing desire and capacity of the revisionist powers to change it. And i.e., Donald Trump's trying to pull us out. And we will reach the moment at which the existing order collapses and the world descends into a phase of brutal anarchy, as it has, and they specifically talk about these wars, as it has 3 times in the past 2 centuries. The cost of that descent in lives and treasure, in lost freedoms and lost hope, will be staggering. Okay, now remember the article is talking about backing into World War III. It goes on to say, Americans tend to take the fundamental stability of the international order for granted, even while complaining about the burden the United States carries in preserving that stability. And history shows that world orders do collapse. Over time, we've seen many efforts to govern the world have collapsed. Even if they were just the Roman Empire itself collapsed. However, when they do it, it's often unexpected, rapid, and comes to a violent end. The late 18th century was the high point of the Enlightenment in Europe, before the continent really fell suddenly into the abyss of the Napoleonic Wars. In the first decade of the 20th century, the world's smartest minds predicted an end to the great power conflict as revolutions in communication and transportation knit economies and people closer together. But the most devastating war in history came 4 years later. The apparent calm of the post-war 1920s became the crisis-ridden 1930s with Hitler and different people coming into power, and then another world war. So they're talking about world wars here. And where exactly it says we are on this classic scenario today. The classic scenario they're talking about is the deterioration of a world governing, the effort toward world government and moving into a world war scenario. That's what this article is talking about. How close the trend lines are to that intersection point is, as always, impossible to know. Now, this last statement, I'm going to want to be very slow here and make sure you get it. It says, now, the scenario is the deterioration of the efforts towards world government, an international order, which brings about a world war. That's what this thing's talking about. And then it says, are we 3 years away from a global crisis or 15 years? We don't know. And then it states, however, that we are somewhat on this scenario we've been talking about. However, we're somewhere on that scenario, and that path is unmistakable. In other words, the foreign policy is saying, folks, we're on the same path that we have been down many times. What path is that? A disintegrating, in the eyes of the international community, a disintegrating world structure, or this world governing body, leading us back into a world conflict to set it straight. What's the title of this article? Backing into World War III. You can go read it for yourself online. It's from Foreign Policy Magazine. So, wow, that's the exact scenario I just went over with you on our timeline from the scriptures of the Bible. That there would be an effort towards a world governing body, and that it would be ongoing, and we're watching the ongoing fulfillment of that prophecy, but they don't have the teeth that they want. The Bible says there's going to be a World War III, sixth trumpet war, and then the nations of the world would yield up their sovereignty completely to this world governing body. Look at the European scenario right now and how they've created the European Union, but some of the nations they haven't been able to dictate to specifically and say, hey, do this, and they just line up. Some of them have balked against what they're trying to do in Brussels and just handing down edicts. But there will come a time when they will force them into allegiance with this fast-moving European Union system. And it's the same way that's going to happen globally before it's over with. The Bible says the European Union is going to lead this world governing body. They're going to demand 100% allegiance to them. And the scenario will get pretty bad before it's over with. They're going to use this global numbering system to get people to economically sanction individuals like they do nations right now, to try to get them to conform to their edicts. So we can watch all of these Bible scenarios, these prophecies, playing out in our news as we speak. And I mean in great detail. It's not, you don't have to guess at any of this stuff. It's been happening for years. All of these things being set up, and the scenarios are playing out right before our very eyes. So let's talk about this scenario, the disintegration of the present world order, and what they're trying to do, this borderless world they're trying to create, and the abolishment of a nation state. That's one of the goals we're wrestling with, because like I said before, one of the main issues we're dealing with today, even in elections and everything, is nationalism, or the nation state, versus globalization. And I would urge you to read the Jan-Feb article that Irvin Baxter wrote. It's coming out in our Jan-Feb issue of Endtime magazine. Irvin Baxter wrote a fabulous article on, I just read it, on globalization versus nationalism. It's one of the main issues in our world today, because there are people that are driving at this world governing body, and there's just a few nations. Remember, Israel just wrote a nation state law here recently, and I mean nations all over the world that are involved in the international community. They were all backbiting and saying this is horrible and it's racist, and I mean all kinds of stuff. And all Israel's trying to do is to protect their nation, when there are many nations who would like to drive them off into the sea. And then, of course, the United Nations. You've got President Donald Trump talking about, I'm a nationalist. I believe in protecting the United States, America first. And the international community hates that. And this is the ongoing fulfillment of Bible prophecy, folks. Now, you've heard us talk about it many times. Strobe Talbot stated it most clearly in his article back in '92, The Birth of the Global Nation. He said, within the next 100 years, nationhood, or the nation state as we know it, it's going to be obsolete. All states will recognize a single global authority. They're not really even trying to hide it anymore. Of course, 2 years later, Strobe Talbot was tapped by President Clinton to serve as Deputy Secretary of State, where he pushed this global agenda, and Bill Clinton's too, until the end of the Clinton presidency in 2001. So globalists around the world, their goal is to have a borderless world or a global state. You've heard about it many times. John Kerry was in his speech to a college. I can't remember the college. He said, get ready to go out into a borderless world. There are many national leaders calling for a borderless world. They don't like borders. They want this world government to be able to dictate to all the nations what they should do. So these globalists, their goal is to have a borderless world or a global state which answers to a global government. To them, the nation state is a cancer and must be abolished. But there are those who do not agree, and it's really infuriating the international community. Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, he just delivered a speech to the German Marshall Fund in Brussels, Belgium, a couple days ago. And get this, in the face of the international community, Mike Pompeo, the title of his speech was Restoring the Role of the Nation State in the Liberal International Order. And like I said, this is the topic of the day, everyone. When you go into elections, our election, one of the main issues in our election just recently in the last elections was Beto against Cruz. Beto wanted to open our borders and let people come across. Cruz said, no, we need to protect our borders. And it's the process of pushing government officials, either pushing for open borders or to protect our borders. The process of it's either nationalism versus globalization. And it goes from the state level all the way internationally. That's one of the main issues in our world today. Are you on board with the world government or are you against us? And so this is the scenario where they see a deteriorating of the international system. Remember, President Donald Trump, the leader of the United States, is against this. From 1945 till now, we've been the main driver behind it. But now he's saying, no, we're not going to play ball with all this stuff. We're going to pull, if we don't like something you're doing, we'll just pull out of it. And he's pulled us out of all kinds of stuff in the last 2 years, for which I am very thankful. And so we're watching these scenarios play out right now. Now, I know I'm coming up to a break here. And so when I get back, I'm going to read you really quickly just a few excerpts from Mike Pompeo's speech on the nation state, really versus where we're at with the liberal international order. Because the Trump administration is pushing the nation state, nationality, America first in this world governing body. And Mike Pompeo gives a great speech on that just a couple days ago.
In 2018, we've seen Bible prophecy fulfilled like never before. From the halls of the United Nations to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, Endtime Ministries continues to reveal the Bible prophecy in the news headlines around the world every day. Whether it's through our broadcast or online at our Jerusalem Prophecy College, your gifts enable us to put vital materials in the hands of those who need it most. Because of you, we continue to replace fear with faith in the hearts of Christians around the world. Moving into 2019, we will continue to see prophecy come to pass at an even swifter pace. We need your support. Your donation of any amount enables us to continue to broadcast and be a voice in the ever-growing censored media. To become a partner or give a one-time gift, visit endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME. Right now. That's 800-363-8463. Go online now to give your best end-of-the-year gift.
So again, the trying issue in our world right now. Are you on board with the world government or globalization, or are you against us? Are you a nationalist? And so Secretary of State Mike Pompeo gave a wonderful speech. The title was Restoring the Role of the Nation State in the Liberal International Order. So he wasn't saying in the speech that we need to do away with the Liberal International Order. He was saying we should use that. It could be used for good if it was ran properly, and it wasn't doing away with the nation state, but it helped the nation states to flourish. So it was a little different twist on it, and I want to read just a few excerpts from that. Mike said, the men who rebuilt Western civilization after World War II, they knew that only strong U.S. leadership in concert with our friends and allies could unite the sovereign nations all around the globe. Notice he throws in sovereign nations, not nations that yield up their sovereignty to a world governing body. This is woven all throughout his really a masterful speech. He said, collectively, we convened multilateral organizations to promote peace and cooperation among the states, not dictate to them, but to promote peace and cooperation among them. After the Cold War ended, we allowed this liberal order to begin to corrode. It failed us in some places, and sometimes it failed you and the rest of the world. He's talking to Brussels, Belgium at this point in the European Union. And he said multilateralism has too often become viewed as an end unto itself. In other words, people are looking for a world government. He said the more treaties we sign, the safer we supposedly are. The more bureaucrats we have, the better the job gets done. Then he says, was that ever really true? I mean, he throws it right in their face. He says, the central question that we face is the question of whether the system is currently configured as it exists today and as the world exists today. Does it really work? Does it work for all the people of the world? He says today at the United Nations, peacekeeping missions drag on for decades, no closer to peace at all. The UN's climate-related treaties are viewed by some nations as simply a vehicle to redistribute wealth, and boy, is that true. Climate change is simply propaganda that is a wealth redistribution scheme. And man, I could spend the rest of my program right there. But he goes on to say anti-Israel bias has been institutionalized at the United Nations. Regional powers collude to vote the likes of Cuba and Venezuela onto the Human Rights Council. Man, that's hypocritical to say the least. The United Nations was founded as an organization that welcomed peace-loving nations. But Mike Pompeo says, I ask today, does it continue to serve its mission faithfully? He says, here in Brussels, the European Union and its predecessors have delivered a great deal of prosperity to the entire continent. Europe is America's single largest trading partner, and we benefit enormously from your success. But Brexit, or the exiting of Great Britain from the European Union, if nothing else, was a political wake-up call. Is the EU ensuring that the interest of countries and their citizens are placed before those of bureaucrats here in Brussels, which is be like our Washington, D.C. here in the United States? Brussels is the center of the European Union. Every nation must honestly acknowledge its responsibilities to its citizens and ask if the current international order serves the good of its people as well as it could. And if not, we must ask, how can we get it right? This is what President Trump is doing. He's returning the United States to its traditional central leadership role in the world. But he sees the world as it is, not how we wish it to be. In other words, he's not seeing it as a world government. He knows that nothing can replace the nation state. There it is. That's what separated this speech from a world government speech, is that President Trump and Mike Pompeo is speaking on behalf of the United States of America. He says Donald Trump knows that nothing can replace the nation state as the guarantor of democratic freedoms and national interest. That's one of the main issues of our time, folks. Are you on the side of the world government or are you not? And this is an exact scenario that's prophesied about just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Mike Pompeo went on to say, and when we all of us ignore our responsibilities to the institutions we've formed, others will abuse them. He's talking about the United Nations. He says our mission is to reassert our sovereignty. not yield up our sovereignty, which is what the world government wants, but we need to reassert the nation-state sovereignty, reform the liberal international order, and we want our friends to help us and to exert their sovereignty as well. We aspire to make the international order serve our citizens. Man, is that not a switch from the news? The international order should serve our citizens, not control them. America intends to lead now and always. International bodies must help facilitate cooperation that bolsters the security and value of the free world, or they must be reformed or eliminated. What a masterful speech. He said, we announced our intent to withdraw from the Paris Agreement on climate change absent better terms for the United States. The current pact would have siphoned money from the American paycheck and enriched polluters like China, i.e., wealth redistribution. Irvin Baxter, myself, we've written so many articles on this, talked about it for years on the radio and on television, that the current climate change efforts, the Paris Climate Agreement, all this human-induced global warming which leads to climate change, it's all propaganda and a scam to redistribute the wealth of the world from developed nations to underdeveloped nations under its socialistic platform. And here Mike Pompeo lays it out perfectly. He said, in America, we found a better solution. We think a better solution for the world. We've unleashed our energy companies to innovate and compete, and our carbon emissions have declined dramatically. You don't dictate to people. You simply energize them and you innovate with these, you show innovation with these companies, and when they do a better job, carbon emissions have declined. You don't go in and tax them to death. They're going to go out of business. You can't do that. Carbon taxes. Look at France right now. You don't want to know what that big upheaval in France is about? Carbon tax. Carbon emissions taxes. And they were going to raise gasoline. And France went in, they went in and started burning cars. And I'm not advocating that, but I'm saying this is what they were fighting against. And guess what? Emmanuel Macron, he done a U-turn and said, okay, we're not going to have it. And he done away with it. France said, we're not going to bow to that because man-made global warming, which leads to climate change, is a hoax. And we're not going to allow you under that hoax to start taxing us. So that's why France is rioted. If you read your news right now, that's why. A global tax or a carbon tax. And there's a global effort to go against that as well. And then Pompeo goes on to say, America renegotiated our treaty, NAFTA even, to advance the interests of the American worker. He said, we're also taking leadership, real action to stop rogue international courts, like the International Criminal Court, from trampling on our sovereignty. He said, and your sovereignty and all of our freedoms. He said, the International Criminal Court's office of the prosecutor is trying to open an investigation into U.S. personnel in connection with the war in Afghanistan. He said, we'll take all the necessary steps to protect our people, those of our NATO allies who fight alongside us inside Afghanistan, for unjust prosecution from the International Criminal Court. Because we know that if it can happen to our people, it can happen to your people too, in Brussels, in the European Union. And it's a worthy question. Does the court continue to serve its original intended purpose? And he said the first 2 years of the Trump administration demonstrate that President Trump is not undermining these institutions, nor is he abandoning American leadership. Quite the opposite. In the finest traditions of our great democracy, we are rallying the noble nations of the world to build a new liberal order that prevents war and achieves greater prosperity for all. Let's work together to preserve the free world so that it continues to serve the interest of the people to whom we each are accountable. Let's do so in a way that creates international organizations that are agile, that respect national sovereignty, that deliver on their mission statements, and that create value for the liberal order and for the world. So at the end of the day, everyone, the scenarios that I laid out in the first part of my program that said, hey, they're trying to establish a world governing body. The Bible says there's going to be a six-trumpet war. I read an article from Foreign Policy that said, look, when we've seen the deterioration of this international order we're trying to establish, we're backing into World War III, folks, because we're seeing it happen right now. The same scenario's playing out. And it's exactly what the Bible says is going to happen. In the end time, the Bible says that globalization versus nationalization, or will you comply with the world government? Will you yield up your sovereignty to this global governing body, or will you stand against that? Now, nationalism or belief in a nation state is standing against the process of globalization, which is moving off into a world governing body. That's the big difference here. When you hear people say, we want a borderless world, we don't want to protect our border, we don't want a wall. In other words, if you're a United States citizen, let's just put it on the table and come right down to where we're at today. If you consider yourself to be a United States citizen, why would you not want to protect our border from illegal individuals, gangs, and all this other stuff coming in? If you were a legit individual wanting to come to our country, you could come through the ports of entry, come in legally, and we would be happy for you to come to America. But think about it. The ones that want to come across illegally, they're the ones that are, are probably doesn't have the best goals for their life here. I mean, if you want to come across legally. And there's nothing wrong with that. And if we build the wall, Donald Trump said we would have a huge door in the wall. And people could come in, but they come in legally. And so there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a Christian individual, and I still don't see anything wrong with that. And so it's the difference today. It's prophesied. Will you be in the end time? Will you conform and comply with the efforts of globalization leading us into this world governing body, or are you going to be one of the ones that stand against that? And that's why our international community is so against President Trump right now. And it's a direct fulfillment of Bible prophecy, folks. The Bible prophesies this world governing body in the last days. And now you know the scenario with the sixth trumpet war. I showed you the timeline, where we're at, the peace agreement, the final 7 years, moving us on into a world governing body. Halfway through, the Antichrist will be the leader of that world governing body and enforce his edicts for the final 3.5 years, the Great Tribulation.
This has been End of the Age, brought to you by the faithful partners of Endtime Ministries. If you're not currently a partner with Endtime Ministries, or if you would like more information, we invite you to call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or visit us online at endtime.com.